Today marks the biggest day in the Dragon Ball community since 2015, when it was revealed that Dragon Ball Super would become its own new series. And for today, guys, if you don't want to get spoiled about Dragon Ball Super Superhero, good luck, because if you just exist somewhere on the internet, it's kind of impossible to avoid spoilers, but hats off to you for trying to avoid spoilers, because it's almost impossible. So let's just get over with this and talk about why this is so massive when it comes to news. If you are Latin American of any sort, live in a community with a lot of Latin Americans, or live in Latin America specifically, you would know about Gohan Blanco. And even if you're not, I mean, even if you're an American fan or a Japanese fan, it doesn't matter. Gohan Blanco is an international meme-like fan-fiction character of Gohan that has been talked about for decades at this point. And the funny thing about Gohan Blanco is that it was always like a fun fan thing that people thought about as like a joke. Like, this is like the fan-fiction version of Gohan, but he actually exists now. And that's the crazy thing about all of this, guys. Gohan Blanco is real. Now, granted, he's not called Gohan Blanco, he's called Final Gohan, which I'll talk about in just a second about that name. But the very fact that Gohan Blanco now exists, I think really, in a lot of ways, will give the Latin American community a huge hard-on when it comes to future Dragon Ball content, considering that a fan-fiction concept was completely replicated into real life. And you always wonder if the people running Dragon Ball know exactly what the fans want, or did somebody there actually just come up with this stuff. But either way, let's first start off with the actual name, Final Gohan. Now, if I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I think it's a horrible name. Obviously, you can't call him Gohan Blanco or Gohan White, because, I mean, that would be completely silly, but the reason why the name Final Gohan is kind of a bit underwhelming is because when you look at Ultimate Gohan, it's basically the same name. You know, and it's funny because if you do a Spanish translation into English, like Ultimate and Final basically mean the same exact thing, the same way it does in English. So it's kind of the same exact name as Ultimate Gohan. So to me, like, the name didn't really change. Ultimate and Final mean the same thing. So when I found out that it was called Final Gohan, I was like, okay, well, that wasn't a good name. But in terms of the design, he's basically a white-haired Gohan with red eyes. Now, I'll be honest. It's like a demonic-looking Gohan with, like, the Sharingan from Naruto, for any of you guys who've followed that with Sasuke and his whole line and stuff. And when I look at it like this, guys, I'm not gonna lie, the form looks incredible. And it also adapts similar to Goku's Ultra Instinct that had that silverish, whitish type hairstyle, but more of like a darker demonic way that like unlocks the dark powers within Gohan, which is why I think this form works really well for Gohan, even though the title is pretty underwhelming and it could have been more creative. Now, what we should have called this, I want you guys to pause this video and say what you would have called this form, because I think Final Gohan's redundant, but the form in terms of design is actually really interesting. Now, to actually talk about some of the things that Final Gohan did, and spoiler, obviously you guys already know by now, he defeats Max Cell with the Makanko Sapo, also known as the Special Beam Cannon, and for those of you who have played the Dragon Ball video games would know that specifically in the Budokai Tenkaichi series, specifically Budokai Tenkaichi 3, future Gohan knew how to do the Special Beam Cannon, which would make sense because in that universe, assuming Gohan had any training after Goku died, which he probably didn't, but if he had any training after Goku died, he would more likely adopt Piccolo's fighting style a lot more than Goku's, because he never went into the Room of Spirit and Time. So I actually think it is realistic for Gohan to use that technique, and I think it would be awesome seeing him actually do it. And specifically, he fires the Makanko Sapo at Max Cell's head, which ultimately defeats him. So in terms of the actual, you know, badass scene of like Piccolo gets knocked unconscious and Gohan has to come save him, that was a pretty predictable plot element, because we all know, even though Piccolo has his new form, which we'll talk about in a second, let's just be honest, it's always about Goku and Goku's lineage, so I knew that Piccolo was going to lose at some point to bring out Gohan's true power, and that is exactly what happened. So I think that the movie's gonna have a pretty cool, element of Gohan and Piccolo getting new forms, and defeating Cell with the Makanko Suppo is definitely gonna be awesome, especially it's like he adopts the Piccolo inside of himself. Now let's move on to some other elements here, guys. So the second thing to talk about is actually going into the concept of Max Cell. So it's revealed now that Max Cell is a rage monster, and for those of you who haven't seen, I posted a community poll for you guys to vote on which type of villains you prefer between, rage monsters and smart villains. That's one thing I'm a little bit underwhelmed by as well. I kind of wish that Max Cell was a more intelligent Cell. I get it, he's not the same exact Cell that, died and fought Gohan many years ago and came from the future and all of that. But if he's still Cell, he should still have a good amount of intelligence because that's who Cell is. Even if you look at the Cell Juniors, yeah, they're children, so they're immature in the way they behave, but they're still intelligent beings that can learn and be adapted to do things. So, in reality, it makes no logical sense why Max Cell wouldn't be a rage monster other than there was a difference in the programming and the development of how he was. So it's a bit of a bummer that Cell wasn't smarter, but if it's not the same Cell, it's not that bad of, of news for like this movie coming up. Now, moving on to the next thing here, guys, we gotta talk about Orange Piccolo. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, that is the cringiest title for a form I think I've ever heard. I mean, some people were calling him Light-Skinned Piccolo. I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with you guys. I think it's a silly name, but in terms of the actual form, like when you see that Piccolo actually has like two forms, Shenron actually gave him an additional form with the wish, which is really cool. And to be honest with you, I think light-skinned Piccolo looks cool. Like, he does look cool, and I like the logo-like thing that he has on his back. It's interesting to see Namekians getting love, so I'm not complaining about it. And I definitely think him being like an orange Namekian kind of adds like a Saiyan element to like the Namekian form, where he has like that goldish yellow-like hue. So they made Piccolo more Saiyan-like, and they also made him a lot bigger, which goes back to his whole Kaiju Super Namekian form where he becomes a giant. So there's some old school stuff kind of mixed in with Saiyan stuff, and the fact that he has two forms, I can't be upset about that because Piccolo's my favorite character, and Gohan's my second favorite character. So in terms of all of that, I'm not upset. I just think the name, just like Final Gohan, is a bit underwhelming. Now, the other thing that we have to talk about here, guys, is also dealing with Android 21, and shout out to Geekdom 101, I talked to him privately before recording this video, and, and also DBS Hype, DBS Chronicles, all of these guys that have provided all of the news updates for all of this. You guys have done a fantastic job. And it's also revealed now that Android 21 was shown in a flashback, and if you know anything about the Dragon Ball Super movies that are basically, canon extensions of what the anime and the manga are, we can officially say Android 21 is officially canon now, which I have no problem with because I've always said, depending on where she entered into the Dragon Ball series, she's a very canonable character, you know what I mean? Just like Cooler. Even though Cooler's not technically canon, he can easily be a canon character. Broly, they made him a canon character. There are certain villains that could be canon. Bojack could be a very canonable character. And then there's certain characters like Janemba that are a lot harder to make into canon. You know what I mean? And I think because of that, and because that she would connect to so much of the old school Android lore, I actually think it's really good that she had that cameo and that they confirmed that, her model and Android 16 and Dr. Jiro's son are all related as part of this Android family tree. So that's an interesting thing to expand the Dragon Ball universe in that aspect. Then the last thing we also have to talk about here, guys, is also dealing with the ending of the movie, where apparently in the post-credits it's revealed that Vegeta finally defeats Goku. Now, we don't know the true extent as to how exactly this happened, but I think it's extremely interesting because Vegeta's already defeated Goku multiple times. So whenever people say Vegeta finally defeats Goku, it's like technically Vegeta's already defeated Goku twice. Now, granted, the way he defeated Goku, I guess you could say were a bit unfair, because in the Saiyan arc, he used his, Great Ape transformation. Goku didn't have a tail anymore, so Vegeta just wrecked him there. And then the second time Vegeta beat him, Goku was off guard because he trusted Vegeta. So I think that it is cool for them to have Vegeta defeating Goku in the end, because it really sets up the future of what Goku and Vegeta will do after this movie. So, even though Vegeta's already beaten him before, I think the future of Dragon Ball looks bright, as their rivalry will continue to just burn hotter and hotter and hotter, and that just makes it even better for the core of the Dragon Ball franchise that loves Goku and Vegeta more than anybody else, because if they're the main characters, then the majority of the Dragon Ball fan base will be satisfied as long as their rivalry just continues to persist.